us today. We have Mr. Ron Jordan and Ms. JOHNNA COSSABOON, who is with Advantage Strategies. They are going to be leading us in the first part of our discussion as we open up our work session. On item 3.01, Mr. Clinton and Ms. Martin are our representatives for the Legislative Committee, and they have been working closely with Advantage Strategies to take us through this process of our proposed legislative position. So, Mr. Clinton, Ms. Martin, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to lead us into this discussion.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. At this time, we're going to actually turn it over to the capable hands of Advantage Strategies and chime in where necessary. Thank you.
Welcome. Just to guide you, this one. To guide you through this, there are three different buckets that we put the legislative agenda in. There is the one that has 4 initiatives is for legislative action. The second one is for things that we ask our delegation to support, and then the last one is things that we oppose. So the first, leading into the first section, it's legislative action on the following items. First is remove the cap on funding support positions. I'm not going to read all the copy there. I know that you've had it ahead of time so that you could review it. I don't think we need to read it.
And just by way of background, so the starting point for this was last year's package, and we updated them and updated to reflect, take out things that that were accomplished, like the school calendar stuff. Did some updated editing on some of the explanatory stuff, and then added a couple of items that we thought would be hot button items this year. And then you'll see at the bottom of each one, whether in the notes, about whether or not it was in last year's package.
Right, and that the notes will be removed before we do a final.
Okay.
That was just for your purposes. Does anyone have any questions on the first one? Okay, we'll go on to the second. Continue to increase funding for the at-risk add-on. Dr. Birdsong did let me know that the at-risk add-on was raised 2% last year. So this has been slightly edited from the copy that you have to include that 2%. So it now just says that the at-risk add-on percentage was increased 2% last year, but the services required and the challenges to staff schools have continued to increase as well, and we need more funds for the at-risk add-on.
So I have a question related to this. So the Board of Education put out some proposals for enhancing the at-risk add-on to include to be an equity fund, which would consolidate the at-risk add-on and into a single expanded fund to include additional money. Is that something that we should really, and I think it's 131 million that would be added into that pot. What do you see as direction this board should give, like in terms of supporting that? Because I think that that is a direction that we should consider supporting, because it's additional funds. It doesn't limit those funds into a particular pool. It gives us more opportunities to support students and provide greater equity, as the fund implies.
It folds the proposal from the state board. Actually, let me back up and talk about those, because they consider them more than proposals.
Yes.
The state board is intending to set up, I don't want to call it a fight, but certainly a staking out of positions with the General Assembly over who is responsible for prescribing the standards of quality. Mm-hmm. The state board says that the Constitution says they shall prescribe, and that the General Assembly can review and alter, and in their opinion, this is what the state at the VAST conference, that unless the General Assembly specifically adopts a bill rejecting the SOQs they have prescribed, then they automatically go into effect, regardless of whether they're funded or not. And they see no role for the governor in that process. And that's so. And however, the General Assembly members, in response to that, pretty much said, one called it the other day a wish list, another called it recommendations, and in discussions and public announcements that the governor's had about his budget priorities, the state board recommendations have not come up in the conversation at all, which kind of tells you, I think, where that may be headed. Now, having said that, let me drill down into the equity fund. It consolidates a number of funds, not just the at-risk add-on. And under the way it's proposed, it would be sent out based on a formula that is based on the teachers, number of teachers you get. You'd get an allocation based on number of teachers. Also, it would prescribe the number of teachers that have to be put in your at-risk schools and programs. So it becomes pretty prescriptive when you start drilling down into it. If you would like, we can provide you a whole lot more detail on it so that you guys can mull over it. For the reasons that I just cited earlier is why we didn't include it in here right now, but we can provide you a lot more information on it. That you can mull over and decide if you want to put it in case of the perhaps in lieu of the at-risk add-on, or maybe as an additive thing like we did with the support staff, where we also dealt with the guidance counselors in that. If that would work for you, would that work for everybody?
Even that PowerPoint that you shared had from BAS had a lot more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I would appreciate that.
Sure, we'll do
because
that.
maybe, I mean, the question is, maybe they need that push from boards to say, to move it in
Sure.
the right direction.
Okay,
So,
we'll do that.
yeah.
So the suggestion is to increase the information that you send to the board with regard to the at-risk add-on, to include the equity. Say that again.
Right, to
Support
to do, maybe to kind of make the process more efficient, what we'll do is send you more detailed information on the proposed equity fund and how it will work. And at the same time, we'll send you a revised version of this one item that includes the equity fund, so you can, if you decide you want to do it, it's all done at once.
With the at-risk add-on.
All right, that would be.
Are we good with that, guys? Okay. Right?
Okay, any more questions on that item? Okay, great. We will send you more information on that, more details, so that you can mull it over. Let's see. Okay, the next one is provide matching state funding to establish a regional workforce training center and innovative high school to prepare students and adults for immediate employment and to connect businesses to a highly skilled workforce.
And you all have had CTE, you remember, as a high priority for several years. And I think a couple of years ago, Senator Wagner got a little bit of money, but this elevates that issue.
Okay. Anybody have questions on that one?
Questions or concerns? What are you asking?
So I have I support the idea of more funding. I'm not real clear on the to what extent the Regional Workforce Training Center and the Innovative High School ties directly to the conversations we've had about the academic career and technology high school. I do think I understand that the regional approach, if we are talking about the CTE high school, is something that has been talked about for some time, and I think is pretty much a necessity in order to align with some of the resources that the governor may be putting forward. I guess my concern is that if we're going to have this, that maybe we need to be more specific in terms of what the regional high school means. So as we've discussed this over the years, part of what has been, the thought has been that students who would attend from other school divisions, that their average daily membership would count under our umbrella and then bring resources.
Right, the funding follows the student.
Yeah, is that what's being said here?
We didn't get into that level of detail. You raised really good questions, but we saw this as primarily a request for support. Those kinds of details would be worked out primarily at your level. If you developed a regional school, pretty much like you do with the governor schools, you all work out locally the payment sharings and things like that. So we didn't get into those. What our intent here was to take what had been fairly general in the previous year's statement and make it more specific to talk about the high school and the workforce training center. And I think the nut of it is actually in the explanatory language, perhaps more than the statement itself.
Yeah, so again, I think that the details matter. We've had quite a bit of discussion around governance and as well as the ADM piece. So I think if this is proposing a regional school, then there's certain language in the in the state code and other maybe even regulations that speak to what a regional school means. What our conversations have been thus far has been about having a career and academic technical high school in which we would provide opportunities for adults and students to attend, but it was falling under certain framework that, frankly, in my opinion, as a board, we seem to not have resolved. So to have language to support the legislature providing resources, I'm in support of that, but I'm very much concerned that that the language we have here seems to be tied to the CTE academic and career technical high school that we've been talking about, that has a lot of other pieces to it that I worry about this language as it's currently written.
Can you be a little more specific, Mr. Jordan? What concerns you in the language?
So it's a little. I mean, I got it a couple of days ago, and I was trying to work through it. So, for example, let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're talking about the CTE school that we've been talking about. So there's right now we know as part of the Choice Neighborhood Grant that the city submitted and that the school system is a partner, that calls for a career and technical high school at Booker T. So we've also had conversations. We just had a joint meeting with the city council not too long ago, and there have been conversations around the model. So if you have a regional charter school, as I recall, the language is different than if you have a charter school that the local school board authorizes. So even in how that process is established, to me is important. And then also in dealing with the ADM piece, I just think there needs to be some clarity. So these are questions that we've talked about as a board and in collaboration with our city council and some of our business partners. And I would just encourage us, if there's a way to be supportive of the ask of the General Assembly and the governor, if that's what we're working towards, without it hindering the discussions that we have going underway. I don't know what that language is. I've just looked at it. Again, I'm supportive of the General Assembly advancing this, but in the notes and in the description, when it starts talking about the high school academics and the role of the high school and potentially a regional high school, I think we need to be clear. My personal view has been that, so as we talked about the career and academic high school, the regional opportunity to me has always been with the adults and the exiting military. So let's just say hypothetically, if we opened up a school and during the day it provided support for our students and for adults, and those adults can come anywhere in the region, I think that aligns with regional workforce development. I think it aligns with Go Virginia. I think it aligns with what used to be called Opportunity Inc., or our Hampton Roads Workforce Development Board. I think it aligns with the goals that the city had established, trying to keep talent, trying to make sure that we have an opportunity for exiting military to get retrained. So on the adult side, I think it makes perfect sense. On the student side, on the high school piece of it, I think it gets complicated, and we need to make sure that we are clear on what we're trying to achieve here.
I think you make very valid points, Mr. Jordan. On the high school piece, it is very different than the workforce piece, because if it becomes regional, you're involved with other school boards, whereas on the adult side, you're not necessarily involved with those school boards. If it's a charter school, I've worked with the charter. We used to represent Richmond, and so I was really involved with the state's first charter school, which was Patrick Henry. And I think people underestimate the amount of effort required in a charter school just to get through the process. So I guess my question to you, and I feel your pain, you want more specificity, but we're not sure what that specificity needs to be right now. So how about, if it's okay with you, you don't need to finalize it now. If you're comfortable, leave it open for a while and see how things, I'm assuming from your conversation there are things going on, and see how they play out for another few weeks before you finalize it. And you can also have the conversation with the perhaps more detailed conversation when we have the half day with the General Assembly membership, and then after that you can take their feedback and maybe nail it down a little more. Would that work for you?
I mean, again, I'm not, I just got it recently.
Sure.
So I just wanted to share with the board, what my thoughts are on it. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I
What's
just
that?
wanted to make sure that they were uploaded on the Friday before the meeting, which is what we agreed to. Okay.
I mean, I wasn't suggesting that it wasn't done
Okay,
by
I
the
just wanted to-
Friday.
Yeah.
I was just simply saying that the language, whether it's 3 days or 30 days, I'm just trying to process through what I read and participate in the work session with my thoughts.
Okay.
So normally what would occur, and maybe this will help, I thought that the reason that we were getting this today was in anticipation for the meeting we would have with our legislators before the month is out. Is that correct?
Week after next.
Yeah.
Right. So if I just want to make sure that what we are communicating as a board in regards to this concept, because again, if we're talking about, I just pulled up the code. If we're talking about our regional school, it's very different. If it's a regional public charter school, it's different. So I think that the intent is a good intent to try to bring resources to Norfolk to support our CTE efforts. But I don't want us to unintentionally send a confusing message about what we're trying to achieve as far as what our educational planning and work has been all this time, and some commitments that I feel like we've made.
Okay.
Mr. Jordan, if we took out the word regional, would that help until we actually
Well, I think
define that?
and the committee members can speak, I think the intent of the regional is to support the ask. That we know that the state is not going to get involved with just funding a school on its own.
Okay.
So Norfolk, the city of Norfolk providing the premier workforce development center that includes high school students and adults I think I'm all for that, and I think that's great. But I do think we have to be clear, because I think that regional piece has meaning as a school board that we have to be clear about versus what regional means in terms of adults. Adults is easy and it's flexible and it's long-standing in terms of support. When you start talking about regional K-12, there's some other things that I think we have to be careful about.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd also like to highlight the fact, and I don't disagree with Mr. Jordan, but to bring some additional context, is that we're talking about a regional workforce center. That's what's leading and driving, and not the high school component. And we're not getting into the weeds of that right now with this proposal here. We're focusing on the funding mechanism. Because that will require a lot of additional conversation amongst the board on what we do and what we don't support looking at this. But this, what's being drafted here as far as the legislative priority, is focused on the funding and going in at a different way rather than just a high school. As we know, the Commonwealth right now does not support capital funds from the state to support construction, but going in a regional and looking at the workforce center is creating a different mechanism and really a different model that we might be able to be the pilot here in the Commonwealth to be able to do in other areas. So there's definitely going to be time for additional conversation, and I share a lot of those different things as to how the ADM, all those things follow, what the structure looks like, but that's not really what this is here right now. It's really focusing the efforts of trying to get the funding with the new mechanism to build this center.
So for the sake of time, we have these priorities and the VSBA priorities and the overview of the legislative day. So I'd like to just go ahead and keep the conversation rolling as far as the next items.
Okay. Let's take a look at that.
This next one's the state funding for replacement or removal of renovation of aging school facilities. This one was included in your package last year as an action item.
Okay. Ms.
No real
Campson
change
and Ms. Basine.
Right, no real change there.
All right,
Well, hold on, Ms.
I'm not
Campson
going
has a
to, this
question.
will be quick. This is my priority. I think, especially when we notice that half of the schools in Norfolk fall into this category. In most states, or many states, provide the capital funds and the renovation funds. This state chooses not to do that as a long-lasting indication of their lack of support for public schools at the state level. And so everything on here is super important. But this right now in Norfolk, this is something that could save us for decades and to come, is to get some of this fund established, because we are the primary, I'm not going to say we're the only urban district that's in this situation, but we're certainly at the top of the list as far as the number of schools. This really needs to become a push. I think it's becoming very obvious that the consequences of the last half century of neglect and deferred maintenance of our schools is now haunting us.
Yep.
You know, we're very lucky that our city government built 5 new schools for us. That took all the pre-1950 elementary schools out. You know, they were taken care of, but now we're 50. A 1950 school is 70 years old, and with deferred maintenance, it's in bad shape. So to me, this is something that I really, really would like to encourage us to really hit hard, because this is an item that really affects Norfolk Public Schools. There are a lot of wonderful things that we'd like to have done. This is a necessity. So that was my point. That's something I'll really push for, is
So
this is
3
very important to
exclamation
this
points
district.
for you on that one. Got it.
Thank you.
Got it.
I really
Okay.
was looking for
No.
like 5.
Okay. Ms. Basine, I'm going to try to keep us moving along.
Well, I'm not going to be long because Ms. Campson, hit the nail on the head there. I wanted to reiterate exactly, what she said. I think I would like to see the explanatory text be much stronger than it is, if
Thank you.
possible. Which is really and the state should, it's the state's, obligation. It needs to be much stronger, because where we learn matters. Tying in, or building infrastructure, learning environment to academic performance and health and safety of our students has to be paramount. So I think, I support what was
That's a
just
good
stated.
idea. Yeah, we will definitely handle that and send you guys a new draft.
I'm going to take this a step further into action. We know that we are going to be meeting with our legislators on November 26th. Okay. I don't know where Senator Stanley is as far as repurposing his bill, but if Norfolk Public Schools needs to write a letter of support, and if we want to be joined by other school boards in writing a letter of support for that bill, I would say that I would fully support us doing that.
Right. And Mr. Jordan was there. We were at the legislative conference at the end of September, and Senator Stanley was there and reiterated, that he is going to, be persistent and keep on moving with that. But he said exactly that he wants, greater activism, advocacy, from school boards to help, across, bipartisan, bring everybody together to really push this issue.
So that kind of brings me to another thing. I know if you all know, is there any entity or school board that's kind of leading the charge to
Well-
bring others together around
We'll
this?
do it.
A different
Yeah, let's
tact.
do it.
I'm like,
I'm all,
Last
I'll lead
year,
that charge.
could be the general.
last year, one school division took a very different tact. They said, we recognize the state doesn't have the debt capacity to do billions of dollars worth of school construction. And what debt capacity they do have gets eaten up by higher ed. So give us the tools locally to raise the money. And so it was Halifax County.
Power of the purse.
Halifax County was authorized a 1 penny increase in the sales tax in a statute, and it was put in a lockbox and had to be used only for school construction.
Right.
And but it had to be passed in a referendum. And in the referendum last week, it passed by about 65%.
How much money does 1% look like? Because I was thinking of 5%.
That's
It's going to vary by locality tremendously.
Oh,
Well, I was going to say the Halifax model, Dr. Mark Lindenberg has led that, and it's a lot of work that went on behind the scenes with that. The School Board Association has been, and I want to misspeak, but the School Board Association has been raising this issue around construction. The task force that I've been co-chairing on students in schools in challenging environments, that has been a priority and something that this school board has supported in the past. But what Halifax did was very.
Yeah, it's time for
Everybody
action.
told them it couldn't be done,
Right.
and
It was led by the school board,
Yeah.
and truthfully, the local governing body and the school board, the supervising school board really held hands and locked arms and just walked down there. But the most compelling testimony was from the kids.
Always, always.
Okay.
so there is a model out there that we can consider,
Beef this
and,
up.
and some efforts that have been out there.
Okay, so this is a discussion we're going to
Statewide.
continue to have then. Okay.
And
All
the
right.
next section is strong legislative advocacy, which is what we're asking our delegation to help with.
Dr. Gabriel?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I add, so there was one additional thing that, before we get on to the next section, in this section, if the board thinks, or if you, with your advisement, of course, the other thing is, across the nation, and we've been reading about decline in reading scores, not only, in our state, but across the nation in regards to like the NAEP scores around reading. And the Commonwealth is also having a lot of discussions about that and whether they're proposing putting the reading specialists in the SOQs. And it seems to me, based on what we're experiencing, that may be something that we might want to consider putting in here to support that effort. I don't know if you feel that's necessary, but it's something that I know also at the legislative conference that was an issue that was raised, where they're seeking support to have that be included in the SOQs. So,
It's the will of the board. We certainly add it. I mean,
yeah.
as you indicated, it's one of the items in that 10 or 12 items from the state board. to
Exactly.
include.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm fine to duplicate it.
Okay, we'll add that. If everybody's-
Does everybody feel that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll add that.
Roll on, JC.
You can go. I have to just make a note before I forget.
So would that be the, on page 5?
Would be after the school construction one,
Yeah.
in the specific ask. So you'll have 5 specific asks that you want them to, if the governor doesn't deal with it in his budget, you want them to deal with it, to actually do something, put in a budget amendment or do whatever.
Yes. Okay, we will add that, but that will not be a problem. Okay. Is everyone ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. These priority items are, we're just asking our delegation to give us strong advocacy when the things come up in session, that they will support them for us. First is to continue to recruit and retain highly skilled instructional staff by, this is a little bit different, adopting a long-term plan of improvement, in addition to the, percentages that we've been getting the last few years, to actually adopt a plan for the future, be a little proactive.
So again, this is another hot area that I want us to be stronger in our advocacy around it, because there's state code that states about teacher compensation to be at or above the national average teacher salary. I want that kind of verbiage in here, because we've got to, we've got to address that and be much stronger in our explanatory text as why that's important.
Well, I would add that I was at the Virginia Association of Counties Conference the other day, earlier this week, and the governor, in his speech, laid out some of his budget priorities, and teacher compensation was one of them.
Yeah.
So it's a good sign. Yes.
When we were building our crew of reading and math specialists, we did a Grow Your Own program and reimbursed tuition. That's how we built up that large group that are now in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, but they had an obligation to see a certain amount of time, didn't they? Do you remember that, Ms. Lands? Remember? No, BHR. Oh, and Mr. Bills wasn't here then. But at that time, I think they had an obligation to stay a certain number of years afterwards until we started, eliminating them. So could that be something that could also go in here? That there would be some type of Grow Your Own program? So as we move toward reestablishing those positions, that we would be able to offer that to teachers. Very expensive to go back and get it for even teachers that want to do it.
And to piggyback on that, I think that was also one of the proposals, was to put teacher mentors and teacher leaders in the SOQs as well. That was one of the proposals. I don't know what you think, what kind of traction you think that's going to get, but that may be
Stipend or something for them too, for teachers to be mentors.
Even in support.
Okay, we'll add that.
To look at that.
Okay, sounds good. And next one is increase the lottery fund percentage directly returned to school divisions. It's returned in a lump sum, and last year it was raised to 45% of the total available lottery revenue. And we're asking them to increase it to 60%. No questions. The next one is to direct JLARC to find the true cost of public education in the Commonwealth and determine the state's responsibility for funding those actual costs.
Yeah, Senator Lewis had a pretty lengthy resolution on this last year, and he might be able to get a lot more traction on it this year.
Mm-hmm. I think you will. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. The next one is to provide more flexibility in the Virginia Preschool Initiative, the VPI, to meet the needs of at-risk children. They opened it up a little bit last year to fill the VPI slots, and we're just asking them to give local control to to determine who qualifies for the VPI. There were actually some slots going empty, which shouldn't happen. Okay, next. Do you have a question?
It's just a white wording, to provide, can we just say to provide expanded access for early childhood programs versus saying, I'm just trying to resist us putting language that says at-risk children.
What would you substitute?
So after VPI, to provide expanded access. And it also ties into at least I hope, our division's continued goal of moving toward more mixed income classrooms. I mean, on the one hand, we're saying, we want to restrict to a certain population, but then our ultimate goal is to expand access for all children.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the examples that you're putting in here are what we had at one time. We were able to have, like, if we had a deployed military parent, that would qualify the children. That was really important here in Norfolk, and how much more challenging it is because there's no help for childcare and stuff. I mean, these things used to be there when we were clearing them for these programs, and then they just disappeared.
The General Assembly has squeezed on it a little bit
Narrowed
every
it
year.
down.
Yeah.
Which is a good way to
So we
drop
need-
enrollment and save money.
Right. So I'm just to expand access.
Okay. We will take a look at that.
It would be nice to say restore,
Right.
since we had them and then they took them away.
Well, the overall pot has grown, so restore would be tough. But what's happened is by squeezing the pot, they've been able to pay for the expanded additional number of kids that have statewide. That's how it's worked out.
Any further questions? Okay. The next section is policy positions.
No, they got one more there. Yeah, this is the one to cover the cost of the VPI assessment program. This was in your program last year. The governor put money in his introduced budget to do it. The General Assembly took it out, so we've still got it in. Yeah, the next section.
Okay. Policy positions, first is to support full funding for the re-benchmarking. That occurs every 2 years, no matter what. The next one is support state incentives for divisions to create, enhance, and support socioeconomically diverse schools and learning environments.
Yeah. So I reiterate strong support for that, but also tying into the Strength and Diversity Act, that I wonder, is there a way to tie in some of the language that they have in there to show like statewide support for some of what they hope additional funding could be used for in that regard? Which I know Congressman Scott is championed.
Okay, great. Okay. Any other comments on that one?
Ditto.
Next one.
Ditto.
Next one is support additional funding to increase the successful school performance in challenging environments. And these are all things that funding would address.
And the third one down is kind of like the grow your own thing. And train and develop them so they can go into being specialists in different instructional areas.
No questions? Support continued reforms to the standard of learning, assessments and other required assessments. And that we're asking for funding for all required assessments and not just the SOL. Pretty much that. Okay, next one is support additional funding to increase security and school safety. I don't think that needs much explanation. Yes.
Yeah, I think your head went up before mine.
Okay.
Or hand, head, whatever
I was
it
going to
was.
make a suggestion or a recommendation for a wording change for
Okay.
consideration. to support additional funding to develop and maintain safe, healthy, and caring school environments versus security and safety, because then we talk about mental health. And I have a concern that if we continually are linking mental health with being dangerous and a safety issue, I think it reinforces stigma. And so I think what we ultimately want are safe, healthy, and caring school environments. So that's what I think the text really speaks
good.
to.
Yeah, it's good
So I would like to see
Frame
that
it in a
change.
positive, frame it in a positive.
Right.
So you
Right.
said to increase additional funding to,
Support additional funding to develop and maintain safe, healthy, and caring school environments.
Okay.
Are you saying for after the comma of line 1?
So the bold would
Yes.
read, support additional funding to develop and maintain safe, healthy, and caring school environments.
But we're not changing the ask underneath it.
Right. It's just the wording.
frame it, yeah, fine with that.
Okay.
Well, for mine, security is something that we don't provide for our elementary schools. It's always in the secondary schools where they certainly need to do it, and it's certainly where they deal with a lot of the mental health issues and all.
Right.
But as far as physical school security, that's not ever mentioned. And our youngest kids are the ones that are the most,
Vulnerable.
yeah, left there with no one there to monitor the safety or the security of the building. So I'm not quite sure how you'd put that in, but I'd like to start seeing something that addresses the fact that we do not have physical security in our elementary buildings.
Yeah, I mean, you'd want to put the, and so state funding should be provided for wraparound mental health services in schools.
Right.
And, school resource
Security
officers.
staff at the elementary level, or at all levels, but the elementary level, the 5 and 6-year-olds, they're the ones that don't get any.
So, but, I mean, you generally SROs, or do you want to be more broad than that?
SSOs.
SSOs, sorry.
Yeah.
Or would you want to be more broad than that?
No, I think that's fine. I'd just like to start seeing a security person at that front door, a security person making rounds, a security person that you could call for quickly if you had a problem.
Ms. Campson wants to be a little bit more specific in this ask.
Yeah, we've made some
Because
notes on
it
We
always
definitely
goes
get it,
mental
yeah.
health,
Yeah.
which is extremely important.
Yes.
But as the days, months, and years go by, but today, this minute,
Yeah.
you need somebody, you need staff.
Okay.
You need a
I
staff person.
understand.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We got it.
We'll
Okay.
add that.
Okay, Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, just for clarity from Ms. Campson, you're advocating security to support the safety of those inside the school. You're not, would you clarify, are you suggesting that whether or not the security staff would be involved with
Student discipline, no.
Okay, I think
No,
that's
no,
important.
no, absolutely not.
No,
That's
I'm
not.
I'm raising that because I think that's
And
important to
that's,
clarify.
I think so, and
Yes.
thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification, no. Security,
Yeah.
not,
And that discussion usually revolves around the SROs rather than the SSOs.
yeah.
But I think we need to be clear, because it's
I agree.
going to lead to the
Because
next
the
one.
next thing I
That's
know,
why I
they're
have my
not doing
hand
what
up.
I want them to do. It's not their job to be called in because someone's doing something in a classroom.
Okay, just to keep us moving ahead, because we are over our time
We're
limit on this
Sorry.
getting near the
discussion.
end.
Yes, we are. Next one is oppose the addition of any unfunded and underfunded state mandates and programs. We have several of those, and we're just always on the lookout to squash anything else that the state will tell you what to do with your money.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oppose efforts to allow non-public school student participation in VHSL activities. That's the TiVo bill that we've been opposing for many years.
all right.
Next is oppose efforts to change or reduce the authority of local school divisions in discipline and expelling students. And that is just something that we've done for years as well. So,
All right,
with those additions and changes, I will I'll make them and send it back to you guys.
Also, for any of you going to the VSBA meeting next week, Johnna will be there.
Look at my happy
Okay,
face.
binder.
Thank you very much. Did y'all want to give the overview while Ron and Jonna are here about the November 26th day?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I haven't seen an agenda yet. Karen, have you sent an agenda out yet?
It's the slight one that Carlos gave us from
Okay.
the last time.
Well, it's gonna be from 9 till noon, I believe.
And it's the 26th,
And
right?
so we have about 20 legislators who are going to be in attendance. And so we're going to have a breakfast, we're going to do a tour of a school, as well as discuss with them what our asks are, what we just went over.
So it's the morning of the 26th of November, right?
And it's at Richard Bowling.
Richard Bowen.
I thought I put it in here, but it's.
You have a list of who RSVP?
Karen's,
Four
Karen.
legislators so far. Who
4, I think,
That's
so
all.
so there are 20 in full attendance, or no?
Well, 4 legislators and then your group.
Oh,
and then
okay.
those folks.
I misunderstood.
I was gonna
Okay, I was
say, we've
gonna-
never had a
I was
turnout
gonna
like
thank
that.
you. I was like, hallelujah.
I don't think you have 20, you don't actually have 20 legislators.
And that's like,
Okay.
what?
I thought they were
I mean,
we're
it should
gonna-
include city,
we're-
city councils invited as
We're,
well.
What's the time on that?
9 to
we need to make sure that we reach out to every single one of them, which I know that you are, to make sure that they can come.
Yes.
And that's
Okay.
for, and that, we invited the regional, or did we just invite those that had toes in Norfolk?
Oh, we invite everyone.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I don't know who everyone is, so.
Everyone
You
deserves
mean the,
our input.
Yeah.
We should have invited our federal, state,
Yeah.
and local delegations.
So all 3 levels of government were invited. And we did, so this year we did a different process on it. We had a couple dates, and we took the majority of the dates of those who responded back, and then that's how we sent the invitations for responses.
and I was just asking for the,
Did you go beyond?
invite the Hampton
delegation?
Roads caucus, I guess is what I'm asking. Or was it just those?
We went, last year, we went beyond.
Right.
And we didn't get the level of response down there. So we focused this one here so that our delegation knew exactly what we were asking for, so that when we go in January, that we could meet with those others and that they could be advocates for us.
If it's not too late, you know, if we wanted to, because we've had turnover in the election, it may be a good
So-
opportunity for some of the newly elected.
So that's the other component. We've already taken that into consideration, and those invitations are going out to those newly elected
In the region.
in the region.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. All right.
VSBA.
All right. So we're good with you guys then.
Yes, all y'all get an A, you did well today.
Okay, all right, so let's move on to the VSBA proposed legislative agenda.
So, Madam Chair, everyone should have received, last year was the first time I think that we've done this, and what we're supposed to be doing, which is bringing the legislative proposed agenda items to the full board for a vote. I'm serving as the delegate at the VSBA conference next week, and so essentially you have their 13 proposals. Mr. Jordan's aware of it. There is a legislative positions, kind of going an entire plan that VSBA has with several items. And so through committee, through representatives throughout the state, amendments, additional things are added, and they're brought to the delegate assembly for all of the school board members for VSBA to actually take up action on. So we have 13 proposals. I'm going to save time and not go through each one of those. Those have been uploaded. There aren't anything that's contentious that I see there, but we will place this on the consent agenda if there isn't any objection to it, and then we'll direct my vote during the delegate assembly.
I did send, I thought, don't we vote on that?
We're going to vote on it in the room.
Oh, did you say that? Okay.
Vote on the amendments
No, who's serving as the delegate?
as the delegate to the VSBA?
Yeah.
We can. Is it a requirement?
I thought it was a
Vote on
requirement.
both. It's the default is the,
Chair and
It's the
vice
chair and
chair.
vice chair, right?
but we are supposed to vote.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not gonna be that, then, I don't know.
I don't mind
Is it-
taking a vote on it if we need to take a vote on it. I think we just have to let them know who's gonna be there.
Yeah, because I just thought it was automatically
Yeah,
the
I
chair
thought you
that
guys were
then
gonna-
went to the.
Mr. Clanton's gonna be
vice
the
chair to-
delegate.
Yeah,
I thought we voted.
Did you want to vote?
we can vote. You take it off the consent agenda if you want.
Well, it's
Not
not
the-
on the consent agenda. This
Oh,
will be
you
a
were putting
separate
to
vote.
see if, okay,
This
sorry.
packet of amendments is on the consent agenda. Ms. Basine is
Oh, so ask for
asking
a separate vote.
separate vote on Mr. Clanton as the
Thank you.
delegate, for the VSBA.
Are you the alternate?
No, Ms. Martin is.
So, without objection, then I have no problem. If the clerk could be directed to add it as a new business item on the agenda, to vote on the delegate and the alternate for the VSBA conference.
Are you the alternate? I don't know. Okay. Okay, so, thank you very much for bringing us through that area of discussion. Let's move on to item 3.02, Dr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, members of the board. I'm going to ask Mr. Billups to join me at the table. If you recall, it's been a couple of months, if my memory serves me correctly. Ms. Smith requested a different format for reporting personnel information. And I think this has been brought up a couple of times when we have met. We've had an opportunity to meet with Ms. Smith on a couple of occasions just to kind of iron out what it is that she was looking for as it relates to how our reporting could possibly look like. So again, we've had an opportunity to meet and to finalize our expectations for the report. And so we wanted to bring it to you in open session for discussion. As you know, Mr. Billups and his team prepare reports for you monthly, and this is another way to look at the data. And so we wanted to have an opportunity today to review the report with you and to make a decision moving forward, how you would like the reports to be presented. And Ms. Smith, if you would.
Quick question. Does this have to be separate, though, from the personnel report? Can it be included along with the personnel report?
It certainly can. So without further ado, Mr. Billups, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Birdsong. As Dr. Birdsong said, we met with Ms. Smith to talk about what she would like to see based upon the data. This is what we've come up with. What you see presented before you is what we call a classroom teacher staffing report, and the data is current as of October 29th. This data comes directly from our Munis system, which is a live system, so it's as of that particular date. If you look along the bottom of the report, you see for each school is listed there, and then we have basically these bars, and what they tell you is that the green bar represents the teachers in that school who are fully licensed. So for example, let's start with just taking a look at the first one, Academy for the Discovery at Lakewood. They have 47 fully licensed teachers at that school, and then 2 teachers who are provisionally licensed at that school. And they have 0 vacancies and 0 long-term substitutes. For reporting purposes, you will see that there's a red bar that represents vacancies and then a gold bar that represents long-term substitutes for the vacancies. These are not duplicative in that the vacancies show what the true vacancy is. It then tells you if there's a long-term substitute in for that particular vacancy. And so when we add up, say for the Academy for Discovery at Lakewood, we would add the 47 fully licensed teachers, the 2 provisionally licensed teachers, and since they have 0 vacancies, that tells us that this particular school has a complement or allocation of 49 teachers. And that's what you see all along this grid here. You can look at any school and it tells you that information. And then along the bottom, just to look at our legend, what it tells you is that on October the 29th, 5.6% of our teachers were provisionally licensed. 91.3% of them are fully licensed. There were 67 actual classroom teacher vacancies, 61 long-term substitutes in for vacancies, and representing again 100% of our classroom teacher population. Understanding that there are other employees who are on a teacher's contract, such as social workers and psychologists and some others. However, we wanted to clearly delineate the actual classroom teacher information, and that's what you see before you in this report.
Ms. Campson?
First of all, I like it. It's very clear, and I'm so visual. I love color. So I have a question, though, that's a little, not on the format, just looking at the information. I thought that Title I schools could not have provisionally accredited teachers in them. Did that rule change?
I would have to check that. I'm not sure. Do you know?
Well, I know that when I moved from not Title I to Title I was no longer allowed to get the new hires that came from out of state because they're provisional for the first year until they get their license.
I think that's changed, Ms.
It must,
Gibson.
it's changed, so no
Yes.
longer
May
that's
we
no
find out?
provisional.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's different. Thank you.
But, Ms. Campson, was that a state requirement or a local?
It was a Title I requirement.
Title I.
The Title I schools, federal requirement, Title I schools, you could not have a provisional teacher in there. They had, and so we were recruiting, of course, out of state, and when we brought teachers in who were certified in their own state but not in Virginia, sometimes they had to take those little tests that they give, and so we'd been getting a lot of people from outside, and suddenly we got cut off. So, so I have a very sharp memory of it, but I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Certainly.
I know this is a little off topic.
And just one other point about this report. You see we have 67 vacancies, but only 61 long-term substitutes, which shows that there are 6 schools, if you were to look at this, that have a vacancy, but they don't have a long-term sub in them. Understand that that's a choice that the principal would have made for some reason or another. And I have the reasons as to why a school would have chosen that, because that's not an area where we typically struggle in finding a suitable long-term substitute. So if we wanted to find one, or the principal wanted to have one there, we would have, but they have different reasons why they may have chosen at this time not to place a long-term sub in that vacancy.
And you're gonna find,
No, you go ahead.
you're gonna find that as, if you decide to go with this report, that it's not gonna change a whole lot, because the school's allocation is the allocation for the year. And so while some of the vacancies may end up being filled, the number of provisionally licensed teachers for the year won't change, and probably until the next year when teachers have met certain requirements and things of that nature. So you won't see drastic changes. You can anticipate changes, for example, in July, because certainly human resources in June will get resignations and things of that nature. And so you'll see, the report will be very busy during that time, but you won't see a lot of movement from here probably until the end of June.
But the movement we see should correspond with the other reports that we see in
It
terms of.
absolutely should.
Right, okay.
It should, because it'll have the specific reasons why there is a vacancy, whether it be a military move or
Right.
a resignation for health reasons or what have you.
Mr. Jordan?
Just for clarity, so the question before us is whether or not we want to receive this report? Is that what we're being asked to?
I think Dr. Birdsong needs clarity from the board as to if we want to adopt this as the way that we receive the information, either in addition to what we already have or in replacement of what we already have during our personnel discussion.
Right, so this is a new report, this is not a.
That's right. This is
Okay.
a
In
new
addition to, I'm not
report.
recommending in replacement of anything. I'm saying in addition to what we already receive, it gives us a bird's eye view of the total school dynamics in terms of teacher allocation.
And then my other question, I know it mentions long-term subs for vacancies. If someone is out on leave,
Right.
where does that show in here?
Okay, what this represents is, this represents long-term substitutes for true vacancies.
Right.
If someone is out on official leave, such as FMLA or medical leave, then they are still considered to be the teacher of record.
Right.
And that would not be captured on this report.
But we can see that on other reports, is that correct?
No, we would have, that's another report that I would have to create,
Okay.
that, that we
clarity.
could pull that together.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I would support having this in addition to what we are presented with in our personnel discussion. I really appreciate Dr. Birdsong and administration putting forth this report, and I think it does give us a very good bird's eye view of the allocation and the disbursement of where we have our vacancies, provisionally licensed teachers, et cetera. Are we all in support of that, so we can give Dr. Birdsong clear direction?
Yes.
Yes? Yes. Okay.
All right.
Next
We will
item?
prepare that monthly for you. Okay, the next item, school nutrition part-time employee compensation proposal. I sent to you some information about funding, excess funding from last school year that was not expended by the Department of School Nutrition. And in working creatively with that department, Mr. Billups' team and the transportation team came up with a creative idea related to recruitment and things of that nature. And so in looking at the data across the region as it relates to some of our school nutrition workers, we weren't very competitive. And so that we thought that would be a wonderful way to be able to compensate our employees so that we are competitive and also be able to recruit some new workers into Norfolk Public Schools. And so we had a short discussion about this, and we wanted to bring forth the proposal to you for your review and to get approval to move forward with it. So Mr. Billups, you want to review
Certainly. And,
the information?
As Dr. Birdsong explained, you can see there the background information. She's basically stated to you all our reasons. If you look at the chart on the bottom, you'll see that within our neighboring districts, we fall pretty much behind them. So this is our way of trying to have a competitive wage with our neighboring school divisions for the rest of this year, in conjunction with the new pilot initiative that we talked also about in our last meeting. So this is our way of recognizing this group of employees in this competitive market. As I pointed out to you in the writing as well, it's not just our neighboring school divisions, but when you start talking about the food service industry, and with this being such a touristy type of region, of course, there's a lot of restaurants, food service types of jobs that are available to folks, and so we're going to have to continue in order to remain competitive to do things like this.
Ms. Smith?
So what is our ability to sustain this long-term?
These funds are currently coming from the existing fund balance within food nutrition services. I believe that there were about 80 vacancies initially. So in working with the director and the current fund balance, we don't anticipate that there would be because there will be additional revenues continuing to come in. So based on the numbers of vacancies that have been carried for such a long time, we don't anticipate with this level of increase being a problem. That's why we took a conservative approach.
So we're reducing our employee allocation in this category to fund the increase in salary?
No, there's not a reduction of the employee allocation for this at all. No, it's not a reduction. It's just that it's funding that had not been used.
So do I understand you to say then we don't intend to ever use it? No, for positions. So if you're using money from vacancies, do we have a need for those positions or do we not have a need for it? So in other words, is this a temporary fix or is it a permanent fix? Because if we need these vacancies, it's a temporary fix. If we don't need them, then it would be a permanent fix to the salary.
Well, we need the positions, but the positions have been vacant for quite some time. So the department has been trying to be as creative as possible. And in some cases, the schools have suffered some in which they've had to maybe shut down certain service lines or not open as many of the lines, but they've been still able to accommodate the students' needs. Doing something like this would be working to fill these vacancies so that the lines can open back up and more people are working and the work is spread, because sometimes people have been quitting these jobs because they've been feeling as though, I'm having to do more than my share, and this work is too much and too hard for the numbers of us who are in the cafeteria.
So to what extent did we take into consideration once we raise the salary that we will have more people come? Do you understand what I'm
No,
what
I
I'm
really
asking?
don't, no.
If I can, I think because it was the same question I was going to ask. So we had, just hypothetically, 80 positions here, but we've got 40 of them that are not filled. But we've got 40 that are there, and we're going to increase their funding here, so their salary. So we're banking on that we've got 40 positions and some additional revenue that we're able to utilize to increase those salaries. But if we still need those positions, what I'm hearing you say, we still need those positions. Now we've got a higher salary, and now we're competitive, and we're coming back and having to backfill those 40. Where does the level set and put us at? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Pretty much.
Because it's the same thing for me. If we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, I want to make sure that we're solving on it.
Paul can be paid.
Exactly. So.
And so to provide some more clarity around this, remember, I sent you some information about the excess in that department. Well, they're a self-sustaining department. They had a pretty significant funds that were not expended last year. And so the operating budget will not be impacted by this. And we've included our budget department so she could forecast for us, and there were no concerns about not being able to sustain the positions. And it may end up that we end up reducing those positions if over a longer period of time it is felt that they're not needed, because again, I think it's been for quite some time, and Ms. Toe would be able to tell you specifically the period of time.
So I am certainly interested in increasing and making our salaries competitive, but I also think we as a board need to know the long-term impact that this will have on our overall operations in terms of, is there a recommendation to ultimately bring down the number of positions so that we can sustain this long-term, or just so that we can have that global understanding of how this impacts our district?
Actually, these are part-time positions. They work 2 to 4 hours a day.
Okay.
They don't get benefits. They are just lunchroom monitors and school nutrition assistants, part-time people. So the increase is like $2 per hour. So 80 positions, $6 a day. It's about 150. Oh, sorry. It's about 150,000. That's what we're looking at. And most of the time, for the past several years, child nutrition's revenue, what they collected for the revenue, is always higher than what they expended. Otherwise, it can come out of their fund balance. They have a very healthy fund balance. So it's not full-time positions.
Okay.
Okay.
And what I'm also hearing is that for many, many years, there have been vacancies, and so impacting our workforce, because the positions have been vacant for so long. If the recommendation comes from the superintendent that we scale down on the positions, nobody is being put out of a job because they were not there to fill the job to begin with. That's what I'm hearing.
That wasn't
No.
That wasn't what I was asking.
I know I'm hearing a healthy fund balance, and I don't know, what's that figure again? Does anybody know? I forgot. I know you sent it out.
Budget neutral, it's budget neutral?
It was like 3.5 million.
$3.5 million.
Yeah.
That's not the operating. This is just.
The excess?
Excess fund balance.
Yes.
Everybody?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the same mistake?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fund balance has not been created strictly from from savings on salaries. It's from
It's
basic
the whole
operational expenses, the
operation,
entire
child
operation.
nutrition, the whole operation.
And so what we're hearing from the administration is that we can sustain this if, got it. Okay.
So that leads me to another question. With it being a self-sustaining fund, what does our policy say in terms of those excess funds and how they can be utilized?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because they have to develop a plan for the Virginia Department of Education. And within that plan, I know that recruitment efforts around hiring staff and salaries and things of that nature is one of the areas that they can address with the excess, but they have to have the plan. The plan hasn't been finalized. I know Mr. Hazelett is working closely with our new director to put the plan together, but it's not done at this time.
Okay, and how do our salaries look, not just the part-time ones, but our full-time salaries? How does that look comparative to the district as a whole? So we're seeing this, but if we can maximize the excess funds that we have for our district as a whole and to bring them up to the regional standard, why not do why not present all of that to us?
Right, and I'm not sure that they're not there, but I do know that these positions have been vacant for a long time, and I know that it's impacting building level morale, and so that's why there was this effort. What can we do to ensure that these positions get staffed? So that you don't have, for example, teachers having to help out in the cafeteria when we can have, you know, part-time people. Maybe somebody is not a contracted bus driver, but they can drive a bus, drop off their load, and then go to a cafeteria and assist, you know. So we're just trying to think outside of the box to get these positions filled.
And excellent, I'm in support of this. I am also in support of showing us with that surplus some type of ultimately doing a work session. How does this fund or how does this program look as a whole in terms of how we're funding our staff, full-time staff who are in these positions in the district, the region as a whole, and can we find opportunities to maximize and improve what we're paying them, considering it's a study, considering that there's a surplus that you all are saying we've had for years in the tune of $3 million.
And I don't know about that surplus for years. I'm talking about the vacancies.
Still. And how can any surplus be used within our district? Is it restricted to just nutrition?
I'm certain it is.
Okay,
yeah,
then fine.
Because they're a self-sustaining entity.
So,
I'd like to see more.
Okay, I understand that you would like to see more, but that is going to be what we kind of discussed about a data request, because it would be a new report generated, my understanding, and the board would have to determine, well, first of all, Dr. Birdsong, I would like to get your input on that, and then the board would have to determine if that is something that we would want to have you do the extra time and effort on.
Sure.
So,
and I think that the information is, you know, we can retrieve it very easily, and Mr. Billups may even know, maybe not, because, you know, not that he walks around with all these numbers in his head, but it would be fairly easy to pull that information regarding the positions and the range of salaries for those full-time positions.
So then we can...
But it would take some time to determine if, you know, if those positions are competitive or not. Again, this was an area of focus because of the number of vacancies, and so we wanted to get out ahead of that.
Okay. So then if you could bring your recommendation back to the board then with the time that you would need, and then we can then determine if we want to pursue this during a work session topic. I know Ms. Campson had her hand up.
First of all, it's good to have an accountant on the school board to catch these things, and certainly I support any member who needs data. But my question was, I'm looking at this, first of all, I'm glad that the solution that you chose for this was salary increases. Our classified staff in all of our schools are, you know, very poorly paid, and so I'm very happy to see this kind of boost to, these are people that work with our children every single day, and we'd like them to be happy, and and share that happiness with the children. So congratulations on that. One little quick question I had is, we heard a month or two ago about the idea of also filling some of these positions with bus drivers.
Yes.
As an option for them. Where did that go?
That's in the works right now.
Okay.
On November 22nd, there is a what we call an information session in which the transportation drivers have been invited to attend
Okay.
to hear how this would work.
Because that was a great creative idea
Yeah,
too. Because that's
and-
yet another group of people that could use extra money.
Right. So that's on November 22nd. It's at Lake Taylor School from 10 to 11. And the principals have also been invited with an email, through an email that I sent out to them today with the flyer that lets them know that if they come and they have vacancies, they very well could be paired with someone who can take their vacancy right then and there. So it's an information session and somewhat of a recruitment fair
And
at the same time.
cafeteria managers are also probably invited to it.
Right. Miss Winter, she's bringing her, so to be represented by Miss Winter and staffs
New
from
director.
Nutrition, Human Resources,
They're used to Helen.
Yes, right.
and the Transportation Department, because we wanted to show a collaborative effort among the three departments. So all of our department representatives will be there, along with transportation employees who have been invited, and they will be paid for their time just for even coming to hear the presentation, and then they will be able to decide if this is something that they would like to do. So that's on November 22nd.
Well, so I'd just like to finish by saying I'm very impressed with the effort that's happening with our in-school staffs, because that's where I want the money going, and to really be very creative with the use of excess funds that we have, so that they go to our lower paid employees and fill the need of the vacancy. So
Right.
the very creative planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Birdsong, the direction that you need from the board on this matter is what?
And can we proceed and then bring back information related to the full-time salaries and positions, or would you like to have all of that information before we move forward?
I'm in support of proceeding with this plan because you have identified a problem and then you have identified a solution that we can act on right away. And then I'm very open to hearing more about the other information that Ms. Smith has requested, but I don't believe that it has to tie it moving forward, this effort. Do we have consensus on that from the board?
Yes.
Yes, since we already discussed it at the last meeting, it's not a new issue.
Yep.
So we adding this to the consent agenda?
It was on here, I thought.
Do we need to add this? It's not a position.
6.05 consent agenda, it's on there, Mr.
It's up there.
Clinton.
Okay, cool,
Uh-huh.
thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Thank you. Very good. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Billups.
Job.
Budget matters.
Yes,
Dr.
okay,
Birdsong.
thank you very much. If you will, take a look at the information, I provided to you regarding the timeline for our budget development process. So October the 16th, all of our departments, from central administration were provided information about how to develop budgets for fiscal year 2020, 2021. The departmental requests were due on the 6th, and so all of those requests have been submitted to the Department of Budget. Also, our deputies are being charged with meeting with their direct reports so that before we come together as a DLT to look at requests for this school year, this will give departments an opportunity to talk about what support is needed for next year and what things can be eliminated from the budget moving forward. Then on the 18th, we would like to hold a public hearing to receive citizens' input related to the budget. That would occur during the business meeting at 7 o'clock. And then, of course, as you already know, in December, the governor's proposed budget for the 2020-2022 biennium will be released. And then in February of next year, on the 19th, we'd like to have a workshop at 4:00 p.m. to review the proposed budget for 2021. And then during the business meeting that evening, have that budget be presented to the board. On March 4th, we're asking for another workshop at 4 o'clock, because by that time we'll have more feedback from the community and from the school board about the direction they would like to go. So we would like to have a workshop at 4 o'clock on March 4th at 4 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock p.m. for another public hearing at a school site this time. And then March the 18th, which will be a business meeting, is scheduled for that day. We're hoping to have the school board's proposed budget adopted. Then on April 1st, we will submit the school board's proposed operating budget to Norfolk Council. We will actually, of course, physically deliver that by no later than April 1st. And then we're not aware of the date for the public hearing for the city's proposed operating and CIP budget, so we will certainly provide that date to you as soon as we're aware of that. Then in May, there will be the adoption of the City of Norfolk's annual appropriation ordinances for 2021. So basically, as you already know, the city will adopt their budget, which of course includes the budget for Norfolk Public Schools, and then there will be the appropriation of funding for that. And then again in May, certainly we want to move forward with the adoption of the school board's operating budget, and as soon as the school board adopts their budget, the following day, of course, City Council will adopt theirs. And so this is the proposed timeline I would like to provide to you related to the process.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate this, Dr. Birdsong, and the time that we allocated for this work session was to begin the process of discussing the board's budget priorities. We wanted to allocate some time for that, but then we also wanted to come back in our December meeting, the work session, to also talk about the actual school board's '(S) budget, and have time for that. And so each of you did receive from Ms. Tanner a year-to-date itemized budget of what we have. So we're not going to get into that part of the discussion today. What I'd like to do then is open up to any questions that board members have. I'm going to try to keep us on a equal time for everyone, and then that way we can provide Dr. Birdsong with some clear direction from the board as to what our focus and priorities are. Okay. Okay. Ms. Campson, Ms. BHASIN, and Mr. Jordan, and then we'll go around the room. Okay, Ms. Campson?
Thank you. Talking about board, because was the one thing, this is so well done, but there was no place for the board priorities, but I see we're bringing that in now.
Yeah, yes.
So what we're getting ready to discuss are what our priorities are.
Yes, and for the sake of time, I understand that some
I've
folks
got
may have
one
prepared lists, and
did.
I think it's appropriate for us, if we would like to share them with everyone, and maybe if you want to hit your high points,
Okay.
that would be appropriate for the sake of time. Okay.
And I'd also like to add, we would like to request that the board provide their priorities as a board to the administration before the winter break by the 18th of December, so that will give us enough time to work through our budget process, if at all possible.
Well, that was gonna be my
That's
question.
great. Okay.
Okay.
About what our process
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you have it on here.
Dr. Gabriel?
Budget.
So before we get into our individual budget priorities, for those of us who might have questions about this timeline or in general, can we talk about that real quick?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
So if you have questions about this, do you have a question about this?
I have a general question for Dr. Birdsong about, so are we, or is the school leadership and the administration and the city leadership continuing to meet to talk about, because we were supposed to get like updates periodically based on the revenue sharing formula?
I know there was a meeting last week, Mr. Hazelett and his team, with the budget office did have a meeting, with Catherine, with
Yeah.
Whitesell,
Yeah.
to start those discussions.
And Mr. Patrick,
Yes,
the budget director.
Okay.
yes.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So just for clarity, so the agreement says that in September, we're supposed to receive some information from the city. Have we gotten that information?
They're gonna be sending a memo, that's what they told us Friday, to Dr. Bolton about the revenue update.
Copies of these?
Okay, so we haven't gotten it yet.
Not yet.
It's just mine.
That's what they told us
But
Friday,
everyone else
that
will have
Dr.
one.
Burson will be receiving a memo.
Did they give you a timeline?
No, they didn't. But the
shall
percent is
follow up.
still the same, 29.55% of new revenue, that's what we get.
Right, okay. Just, okay, thank you.
All right, now we're ready to do that.
I'm going to make one more. Dr. Birdsong, just with regards to this timeline, I think it's wonderful that we've outlined exactly what the thought process is. I can't stress enough how important it is to have good communication and education with our stakeholders, internal and external, about what this budget means, what the implications are, what the role of the school board is in this budget process, what we can and cannot fund, and the different components to the budget. Operations, CIP, federal, nutrition, all of that, because I know for me, it just didn't sink in until after, a couple of years of being on the board. And so for, regular citizen, it's a lot for them to digest, and they want to be a part of this process. I think it's our job to make sure that we are educating them and communicating with them appropriately. So, okay, if we'd like to go ahead and, I heard someone ask a question about process. What is our process for the budget priorities? I would like to hear where everyone is at this point in time, and then what I'd like to do is, since Dr. Birdsong has shared that she needs our finalized items by December the 18th, December 4th, we'll be able to come back to these priorities and narrow them down and then deliver a final product to her on December the 18th. I would hope that we would align our priorities with the accountability plan. I know that the accountability plan was something that was thoughtfully produced, taken into consideration data. Maintenance was a part of that, special education, gifted, etc. But I also understand that other items come up that we have to be responsive to. So I'll just leave it at that and get board members' feedback on their priorities for right now, where you stand right now. Okay. So we're just going to go around the room. Then when Ms. BHASIN comes back, we'll get back to her. Do you want to lead us off, Ms. Campson?
All right, so this is very similar. You're going to find a lot of the same requests that you heard when I submitted mine last year. I did want to make sure, first of all, that it was aligned to our accountability plan, as it should be, and its fitting should be aligned to our accountability plan. I also wanted to make sure that I address both equal and equitable. You'll see, that's why you'll see things listed as general budget or grant budget, so that the general budget is spreading it equally, so that everyone has a baseline of needed support. But then we use our grant money to layer that support to our high poverty schools, our non-accredited schools, our ESSA schools, which is how Title I money is supposed to work. I also included how to look at the ESSA money and the Title I money. I'd like to have it looked at to see how much is staying elsewhere and not directly going to in-school additional instruction and support for our high poverty children, and especially those children that are in non-accredited schools. That's where all that money should be going. And so you'll see my request for an audit there. So basically, I'm looking at the same thing I was looking at last year. Number one is a raise for teachers, a minimum of 2%, and not a raise that actually just goes to finish up the step compression solution. That should have been separate instead of being part of what's considered a raise. That's not a raise, that's compensating our teachers for what they should have had in the first place, and it should not also be paid for by the state. They need to give us their own chunk of money, that this city needs to give our teachers a minimum of a 2% raise. And then, of course, I'm looking at the restoration not new positions, the restoration of the positions that we previously had to give instructional support to our schools in reading and math. Literacy, reading literacy should be our number one concern, getting our schools accredited, closing the achievement gap. You got to put extra support in the schools, high poverty schools, schools that are not accredited to do that. So if you give every school a reading specialist, then you need to give a second reading specialist into the schools that are the ESSA schools and the high poverty schools, all of which are Title I schools, and that's where all that money should be going. And then, as I said, I made some comments about the Title I grant and the ESSA grant. And then goal 2, what I keep saying, a full-time security person in the elementary schools for security, and then systematic maintenance to try and start taking care of the deferred maintenance. And those are basically my priorities. There are a lot of other needs, but this is where I'm prioritizing my spending.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
That pretty fast.
That was
I agree with a lot of what,
because they're going around. I'm
what
sorry.
Lauren has been advocating for the past couple of years or year and a half. And I do want to also be cognizant of our previous commitments. For example, I keep bringing up the special education audit/program evaluation, that we have the funding to proceed with that. I do, again, with our transportation and any changes that are going to occur with our changes in start times, I do want to go along with that is a route evaluation, that our bus routes and bus stops, that they are actually serving the students and not putting them in harm's way. You know, that ties in with the safety and security of our schools, and also under that same umbrella is the having proper security at our elementary schools and evaluating our security situation, the safe environment, and providing the security needed, and you know, hopefully come up once we have some more recommendations from our Safer Schools task force that we can be able to support that, you know, so that we actually put the task force together. People are working and reviewing our current situation, and we want them to have recommendations that we can actually act on and not just say thank you for your time and send them on our way.
No, that's great. Ms. Smith?
I primarily would like to see some commitment to making our schools that are not fully accredited whole. I'm just going to use the term whole. I leave it to the administration to tell us what that looks like based on the data. If it means additional reading specialists within our schools, then so be it. If it means math specialists, so be it. But I would like a data-driven effort that tells us what those schools are in need of to make them whole and in whole to be successful. And then we align the budget with the results of that information.
Great. Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, first I want to go back to my clarity question I had. So what we're providing to Dr. Birdsong and administration will be the school board's priorities. We're not sending 7 individual priorities for her to sort through. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in that vein, I still would like to see somewhere on the calendar, and I don't know if it's at the 18th meeting, I'd just like to get a sense of where Dr. Birdsong and administration feels we are in the initiatives that we've had underway for the last few years. So, you know, where we are with the pay and comp study, where we are with our educational planning. There are a variety of things in there. For example, the earlier start times and other things that have been discussed. I do think we need to, similar to what Ms. Smith was saying, just make sure we have a good handle on what's in the accountability plan. I think part of the tendency is we recognize that some of these things are multi-year and some things are not And I think every year we get into this process, and it's like we think that it's one
Do or
year.
die.
Yeah, and Noelle, you remember, and Tanya as well, we worked on all the master milestones and all that. We tried to move towards a more short-term and long-term strategy. I think we've got to revisit that. I would like to see, as part of that discussion, an update of what we have in our equity policy in terms of our reports. I think it ties to Mrs. Campson's point around equity and trying to make sure that we provide resources where it's needed. I think we need to have a real good sense of where we are with that. We had a series of recommendations that came out of the Council of Great City Schools reports on finance, infrastructure, and I forgot what the third one was.
Transportation.
Transportation. So I think we need to hear from the administration
Right.
how they see we are with those things, and because at the end of the day, we have to make some choices, and I think part of establishing priorities deals with really having a good picture of where we are. I would like for us to fund resources for having legal services separate from the city of Norfolk. I think with in the transition that we're in, looking at hiring a new superintendent, I think that is an area where we need to advance. Over time, we've provided some additional resources, but I think at least for budgeting purposes, we may come back and decide that we can't afford it. But I think for budgeting purposes, we should take a look at what do our legal services cost and how would we go about paying for them if we didn't have the city attorney providing those resources. And then I agree with the effort and intent on the capital improvement and infrastructure side. I don't have specific priorities at this point because where the facilities committee was going was trying to bring back some recommendations in January. So I would just ask if we're going to continue down that path, that we put some type of placeholder that allows for the board and administration to make adjustments based upon the recommendations that come from the experts. I think we have to make sure we have a good feel on that, and there'll probably be more along the way. But those are my initial thoughts.
Great. Ms. BHASIN?
I had several comments in the similar vein as Mr. Jordan. I partly, feel like I need more data to really guide my, budget ask, or budget suggestion, recommendation, whatever you want to call it, because, I think we've talked about going back and looking at our pay and comp study and evaluating that, but in conjunction with that is also really having a comprehensive discussion on teacher retention and really what it is, where are some of the areas that we really need to examine. Are we losing teachers at a particular point in their tenure as a teacher, and do we need to go back and look at the recommendations and maybe make some tweaks, or maybe we haven't hit the right targets in terms of how we're phasing in those recommendations, because I think now we're in phase 4 of those recommendations, and I know we need to have some review of all of that information, which we haven't had to date. So, I urge us to really move that up on the priority list of agenda planning, because teacher pay is a priority. We consistently hear about it. It's in our superintendent community feedback. I mean, it's just such a critical piece, and they're the most important, aside from our students, in our school division. Similar to Miss Martin, you know, we've for years have been asking for a special education review, program evaluation, not just compliance. But at this point, year after year, when that budget ask is made, we say we want to wait for the audit or wait for the evaluation. And as a division, I like to think that we have some mechanism, some evaluation and monitoring that's going on an ongoing basis. So I want more feedback as to what the needs are there, because if I were to just look at a snapshot, you know, from the piecemeal information that we have to date, you know, looking at, you know, our termination meeting, like our personnel reports, looking at, you know, our SPED inclusion teachers where there's a high turnover, you know, and I've asked about this before, and Dr. Wirtz, I know you wouldn't remember, but maybe the board does, about do we need additional support in terms of providing inclusion? Like, you know, we have a hashtag inclusion works in the hallway, but what I hear a lot is that, is it really working? And so I would like some more information and data to help guide that. Like, what do you have, what does the division have to date that can help inform the budget process, so that we can ensure that the resources are going to those students? We can't keep waiting year after year for an audit, which I get would be much more informative, but we have to be able to address those issues. Tying into our goal around safe, healthy, and caring environments, a health and wellness coordinator. I think that's important. Our kids can't learn if we don't have, you know, healthy learning environments. So and I hear that consistently as well, you know, on school visits and just in general from members of the community. So those are just some thoughts at the top of my head, but I do think that, and of course, you know, making sure that the initiatives that we have, as Mr. Jordan mentioned, you know, ed planning, the paying comp, which I already mentioned, but also looking at discipline. What are, you know, our alternative education programs? What supports are needed there? I think, you know, some of those areas that we've begun to look at, but, you know, I think we need to keep our finger on the pulse.
Okay. Mr. Clanton?
Think about when you're kind of on the ground last, you guys have said a lot that have been down here, so I'm like literally trying to go through my list to see what hadn't already been stated. But I will say that one of the things that I'm looking at in some discussions, and I think Dr. Gabriel, you and myself were actually privy in one of those discussions when we talked about stipends and reevaluating how we're utilizing those, not just for our Virginia High School League, coaches and so forth there, but also teachers who are doing co-curricular, you know, student organizations and things like that, and just reassessing how we're utilizing those to support those efforts that, you know, continue the learning outside of the classroom for the students. One of the other things that I'm looking at, and of course, Mr. Jordan had mentioned about the capital improvement as a whole, I'm definitely working towards sending over a budget and some type of plan this year to City Council that really asks for the money. And that what we need in really identifying and letting the school division be the driver of that request and what we need to support the district. In schools suspension, if we get more of that so that we can not have so many students, and though we're doing a good job, but I think we could do more to ensure that students aren't being sent home and that we're finding alternative ways. And it's also looking at alternative education as a whole when we look at infrastructures like Madison and how we're deploying those things. We hear great things, and there's great caring individuals who are in that building, but as we know, just in general, facilities as a whole. And then one of the last things that I'll just place down here is working towards, and it's no secret for me, my priority of really looking at what we've done for Maury High School in regards to a feasibility study of what that programming looks like there, and doing the same thing for Booker T. Washington High School, and connecting it back to the facility in itself. So
Okay.
That's pretty much what I have.
Okay, thank you. So for me, I would like for our board to ask for what we need. I want us to be very clear with our city council colleagues. It is not us versus them. It is us together with them. And I want us to not only ask for what we need, but show how, if we receive what we need, what we can do with it. So that is just a general statement. And I agree, going last, we hear from so much of what everyone has already said. So I'm just going to say, in addition to some of the items that have already been mentioned, the reading specialists, the raises, priority on teachers, capital improvement, my take on fully funding, I want to hear the review of the special education audit and the gifted education audit, and I want to know what we're going to do to support those recommendations, and if we can't do it all in 1 year, what is the plan to do it over a period of time. I would like to see transportation provided to the Blair Middle School students who attend the medical sciences program. It gets at an issue of equity. They have asked for it year after year. I know that there have been efforts to try to put it into the budget. I'm asking for it again. Those students deserve to have transportation provided. I would like to hear a little bit more about the mixed income preschool. I know that we kicked it off and it was a great effort, and it was, from what I understood, well received. I would like to know if there's any interest in pursuing this from an administrative standpoint, and what we can do to perhaps sustain a model. Going on to the safe, secure, and healthy learning environments, I would like to know what the plans are for unoccupied buildings that we have, and the long-term educational goals, and I know that that's a discussion that's occurring right now in the Facilities Committee. Let's see. I want us to ask for what we need for deferred maintenance. That seems to be at the top of our list. And then again, going back to our commitments of late high school start times, the lighting, transportation, all of that. How are we going to take that into consideration? But that would be a budget priority for me. I also want us to work collaboratively with our mental health partners to identify behavioral health specialists in our buildings to help remove some of those social and emotional barriers to teaching and learning. And I know that we can provide that within our budget, but I also want to hear perhaps out-of-the-box thinking of what we can do to leverage our partners that we have that are right here in our backyard in order to provide those services. And, you know, in looking at where the needs of the division are, I don't know that I would necessarily, I know we have a position right now for a wellness coordinator, but if I understood there to be some type of a position that would coordinate this, the social and emotional barriers, the mental health, whatever you would recommend, I would be open to hearing about that. But I would really want to understand how they're going to function to help the students within the buildings and to manage those different entities. Let's see. I think everything else has already been said. So, moving
And all that?
Every
moving
word I
forward,
hope she
this
wrote
is.
down.
Are you ready for my plan?
Yeah. I think our next meeting is December the 4th. We know that we have to tackle the school board's budget. Ms. Tanner, if you would be so gracious to compile the list that members have discussed, and if you have something written down electronically, if you can send that to Ms. Tanner so that she can share that with the board, with Dr. Birdsong. And then what we'll do is we'll categorize it according to the goals of the accountability plan. And if there's another category, we'll make another category, and then we will go through and, very similar to what we've done in the past, show of hands what your priorities are, and come together on a consensus. Okay, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Clanton?
Previous boards, we had talked about recommending to the superintendent to create a document of needs, similar to the model that Virginia Beach has done. And what I think I'm hearing is maybe we need to do two things. One is ask for this documentation of needs, which is that big running list. If we had everything that we say that we wanted, what it would look like, which I think is, then that helps to inform the budget. But I think we need to be careful about using the budget as the main tool for identifying the needs that maybe we need that companion document. And then that will help us as we are running along, whether it's updating our accountability plan or as we get feedback from the various task forces and committees, it could feed into that superintendent documentation of needs. And I don't know if I shared it with this board, but I know we talked about it with the previous board. And with your okay, I would share that with the administration, with the board as something for us to consider.
Certainly. And I also, you know, this is a process that's fluid, and so I do understand the need to have information in order to make informed decisions, such as, you know, going back to Dr. Birdsong and administration, you know, what is it that you need? Where are we on the pay and comp study? Do we need to continue with the incentive pay for the hard to staff schools? I certainly can appreciate that, and that will help to also inform our decisions. So I would appreciate it, Rodney, if you could share that document with us and with the administration. But for right now, is everybody comfortable with at least Ms. Tanner organizing our initial thoughts, putting it into the categories of our school board goals, and sending it out to everybody, and then picking up the discussion again on December the 4th?
You're saying what we just talked about? You still want us to send something in writing first, right?
Well, yeah,
Well, to
both.
make the list.
Yeah, if you have the
I'm
list,
trying
and she
to-
can base it off of our notes.
I'm trying to understand, because if we're asking Ms. Tanner to try to figure out everything that we just said, I'll just say it might be easier
Please.
if we wrote it down and sent it to
That
her
would be
in
best.
some format that
Sure.
allows for her then to consolidate it. That was
If
my
you
point.
can, so if you can pre-organize your thoughts into the goals of the accountability plan and then another section, that would be even better.
Yeah, we could do it. I mean, Ms. Campson I think, has given us a model for
Yeah,
doing
that-
it. We just follow the
Lots
model.
of bold and big lettering.
Yeah, and I have one
Instead
that
of
I can
exclamation
share
points,
too.
I had to do something.
So, but if I think I heard it too, you wanted us to, the items that we're requesting, tag it back to the accountability plan,
Yes.
right? The
Yes.
sections in
The
there.
way
Which
it's
she
done.
did.
Like
She
what you
did.
did. There you go.
Yep,
Cool.
yep, okay.
That's what I always required my stamp.
So what's our deadline?
Gotta have time to get it ready before December 4th.
Yeah.
So, that's a good question.
Here, let me give
The
you.
29th is the Friday before.
By next Wednesday?
Well, but she's
By the
gotta post
20th?
it, so we don't wanna put it the Friday before.
I mean, but if she gets our stuff by next Wednesday, I mean,
Yeah, I'm just saying, what's our deadline to get to Ms. Tanner?
November 20th is what?
The 20th, so
20th?
next Friday?
yeah. Does that sound good for everybody? I mean, we've already thought about it. It's just
Yeah,
a
all you
matter of
gotta do.
putting it on paper.
I think most people had
Yeah.
something written down, they just could type it up.
Okay, so November the 20th.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Tied to accountability.
So I know that we were expected to go into closed session at 4 o'clock, but I'm gonna give us 15 minutes to discuss policy, because that is really important. So let's go ahead and jump right into policy, and I'm just gonna make a quick statement here. Ms. Tanner has been working very, very hard to assemble the policies and get everything organized for us. It is really helpful if we can let her know, which I think she did for us today, is if you need to have them in print form, if you're satisfied with them in electronic form. So moving forward, Ms. Tanner, what would be easier for you, for the board to communicate to you about whether or not you need to have printed copies for them? What's easier for you?
It's for them to tell me that. This go
Okay.
around, I emailed everyone, and everyone's like, I'm good.
By when? By when?
I would like to have at least a week's notice.
So assuming that everything is on board docs by the Friday, which is what the expectation is it okay if individuals let you know by, that's not necessarily a week, but by that Friday?
Friday, that
Yeah.
Thursday or Friday.
Thursday or Friday?
Like
If you need the
plan
policies in print, printed.
Every single
printed, okay?
Those are the ones that are on the consent agenda.
We're not gonna
Oh.
have many more after this one, so.
She's like, do I need to print the policies for everybody that we have? No.
No, I do not.
No, we've saved some trees here.
Yeah, most
Okay.
of these policies are legal reference updates from February and May. As you see here, I do have a list of policies that are not on here that are still have some work on them, and also I need some clarification on a couple of them.
So list two, where LC and all of them came in and said they pulled some of the policies, so what's truly here is what you see on board docs, because there's some still different discussion.
Okay. So I'll just go down my notes. Is that okay if I just go down my notes in the policies, and if I don't mention it, there's no issue. It's just a
Okay.
legal change, and of course, Tanya's free to comment as well. AE, that's a simple title change by VSBA, so we're going to accept the VSBA version of that. So I have a note here. There was policy BDD, again, is not on here. We need clarification for why we were asked to review it. It's electronic participation in meetings from remote locations.
I'm going to do that at the December.
I had it here for discussion. Oh, you're right. Okay, so December, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so then DLZ payroll procedures, the red line version is the same as the VSBA, and Ms. Ingram, we asked her if she had any changes to that. Why there's a Z on there. Did you? What? Did you?
was a change.
Sorry, I'm looking at
Wasn't that the one that had $2,500 in it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there was a
She took
change,
that
I
out,
remember
yeah.
that, I can't remember.
Okay,
The
so we
threshold
we
was
just needed
different.
clarification on
That
what that
policy again,
change
I'm so
was.
sorry.
DLZ is right here.
DL,
DLC, sorry,
Okay,
Ms.
thank you.
Reynolds.
There was a change.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Ju-
yeah.
What's the issue?
Ms. Tanner?
There was a change.
Or,
You want Ms. Tanner, or do you want?
well, I'm looking at Dr. Cataldo, because when we left our policy committee, it was if there were any changes, you were going to let us know. So what's up there should be
I'm just trying to clarify
the
this as quickly as
correct
possible.
versions.
That means we have made a change to it, and then that should be up there indicating.
Right, but what I'm asking is that if it's up there with a Z, then that's what is intended.
So there was a change, but it wasn't indicated in the red line version.
Right.
So this is the change here?
The one that,
Yeah.
Okay, so
we,
this would have
what are
been
we
sent to
doing?
us. Okay, so we're gonna accept the changes today? We're gonna wait until December. DLZ is not there on the
Which,
consent.
are you going
These-
down?
These are all
is
the
on- listed
legislative
on here.
changes though, right?
These
We're talking
are-
about now?
On consent,
Legislative
Yeah,
changes.
DLZ is on the
consent agenda.
for tonight.
yes,
Okay,
and
so
that's
we
correct,
hadn't-
right.
So we hadn't discussed this, so.
DLZ, the
We-
word full was added to say the first full month of employment.
Yes.
So that's what the change is.
Right, and that's why it's a Norfolk-specific policy.
Right, so we're
Right.
accepting it as changed.
Yes.
Right.
And I have the same comment for DMZ,
Right. So, as the board knows,
which is up in the February list on the
Right.
consent
This is our
agenda. So
policy.
same thing, so
Did
we're
not always
accepting.
align with VSBA.
Okay.
Okay.
right.
Keep our policy and accept the legal reference.
Okay, and we had some discussion, Dr. Gabriel had asked that we review the family life education, which was also on the updates. And there is a community involvement team, that used to be a requirement that was removed. And I have, that we need to decide whether to keep the community involvement team and make it, so go above and beyond what the VSBA recommendation is. And what would that committee look like?
Yeah.
So that's a discussion that we can have here. We had discussed some.
Right, yeah. So,
The workshop committee,
um,
workshop meeting discussion.
well, we had talked about those things that we were going to come back. The policy committee is meeting next Monday on the 18th to, any policy that we are still discussing will be discussed then, and then for further discussion on December 4th. But today, the focus was just to make sure that the February and May batch of policies from VSBA are reviewed, quickly with, which you've had now for several days to review. So this should be a quick, so anything that requires further discussion and clarification or is still in committee, I would say let's hold off on that discussion and have that.
Okay, that wasn't in my notes. This was supposed to be an opportunity to discuss it and then take it back to the committee for changes for the next, or I'm sorry, to take it, then it was tonight was the night to discuss it as a board, some of these changes as a board so that we can vote on it in our December meeting. Okay.
So then let's do this.
I will say, dress code policy, we added straps.
Yeah.
It's on here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going down my list of.
That one was done. We
Okay.
just had that, and we discussed it at the last work session.
Yeah, I
You guys all
noticed
might
that.
remember that.
So
And it
with
has
that.
a Z on it, so that's Norfolk
Right.
specific.
Right.
With the dress code policy, is there, are we still reviewing that? Is there some type of task force or something in the district right
The
now?
regulations are
Right.
being written, but we as a school board have voted to pass it, and now we have this one addition, which should be the straps. But otherwise, I don't know of any other additions that have come
Just the
forward.
regulations are being developed, but the
Developed.
Okay.
policy is with the addition of the straps.
Right.
Principals are involved.
Principals are
Right,
involved in that.
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And Ms. Martin did raise that at the last work session, what the suggested change was. So the committee went back and edited that, and so it was ready to be shared with you all and adopted tonight. So
Okay.
that's what, yeah.
Okay,
I
that's good.
just, well, I have it there, and I'm sorry, Ms. Smith, I see you in the peripheral. But we had a very in-depth conversation in July. I know we have a whole lot here now, I'm not trying to stop the process, but talked about timeline. And I like to see us get to that particular point, so when we talk about the policies, we've got a timeline associated with it. Even, and I'll give an example, like with this dress code, if we're saying that at some particular point, we're gonna come back and look at it after a year of implementation or something like that, where we review, just to get things on a basis of when we're reviewing it. But we talked about timeline, and I just want to remind that we did that in July, and I'd like to see us at some point kind of work that in.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not recalling the timeline discussion, but we traditionally, we haven't said, oh, well, we're going to change it now, and then in a year come back and look at it, unless there's some reason for us to look at it, because we're constantly
Yeah.
rolling with what.
Yeah, I just use that as an
VSBA
example,
the-
but we had an in-depth conversation, y'all were there, but we talked about placing some type of timeline sheet on it, and it may be, hey, this is something that came from VSBA, and this
from
is
a
just
community
community, this may come from community, because we were talking about the,
Recess policy.
recess policy, that's where that
That's
came
where
in,
the
but
timeline-
we may get something from VSB like you all getting here, which might be just something simple, or something that the General Assembly says that we have to do, and in the timeline may be, there is no timeline,
So
we just need
for
to.
particular policies of that are topical,
interest.
not for all of our policies. that we
Right.
go back.
Exactly,
That would
so that
be
it
so much
matches with,
work.
so that it matches with our overall planning calendar, so we don't forget the stuff and we don't get bottlenecked with so many things. That's what I'm trying to get towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add to that, yes, we talked about timeline as it related to the recess piece, and I completely understand what you're saying, and I think the one, which I think requires us to have a more in-depth discussion, but we govern through policy. So when we in agenda planning and determining that, tying it to our accountability plan, and also tying it to the set of policies that are impacted by those things. So, through a policy governance model, so to speak, that we're then, asking the administration, the board, okay, are we monitoring our policies, how, we have to be able to evaluate them and see if there are any changes that are necessary. So I think, if we could really discuss and talk about how we get into that pattern, I think that will be beneficial to doing what you're asking. But yeah.
So then, to bring the points home so that we can vote on this at our consent agenda, all of the policies here that we see before us have been discussed with administration. They've been reviewed with administration. They've been reviewed by the policy committee, and it is your recommendation to this board, unless you have otherwise brought it to our attention, that you are recommending that these are on the consent agenda. Am I clear on that?
That is clear, yes.
Okay. Ms.
I
Smith?
have one question about policy AF.
Okay.
What were the changes? When you look at the red line version, it's like you see pieces of it that appear to be changed, but the policy as a whole is totally different from the current version. So I just didn't understand where the changes actually come in. So when you first look at it, the title is Commitment to Accomplishment.
Right.
Then when we look at the red line version, it says comprehensive plan.
Right.
So I wasn't, I didn't understand.
Yeah, and that
I
actually.
don't see the change from
Right.
the old to the current in the red line version.
Right, and we
It's
did
totally
talk.
different.
Yeah, and we talked about that in our committee, and that is going forward, how it's going to look right now, because we did talk about that, about, if it's a red line version, it should be a red line of our current.
Of the current version.
Our current version, because in this case, the title's changed, that should be striked, it should be reflective of what what the changes to the current. And so that is what you will see, going forward, yeah.
So in that,
Yeah.
where
And
it talks
should have
about,
been that way, yeah.
where it mentions, second paragraph from the bottom, where it mentions, school board will present or presents a report to the public by November 1st. Is that current or is that proposed?
That is in the red line, the VSBA proposed.
Okay, so going forward,
going
this is what
forward,
we will
right.
do. Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Jordan?
Policy FEA, the educational facilities specifications. I think somewhere along the way there was a addition from VSBA via the state that there is supposed to be a paragraph that says the school board consults with the local building official and the state or local fire marshal to develop a procurement plan. And when I look at our clean version, I think that's missing. And I think what occurred is somewhere between the February version, the May version, and our existing version, that language got lost. But I think we're required to have that paragraph that states the school board consults with the local building official and the state or local fire marshal to develop a procurement plan to ensure that all security enhancements to public school buildings are in compliance with the uniform statewide building code and statewide fire prevention code.
What's the date on that, Mr. Jordan?
That would have been the May.
It was in both. It was
Okay.
in the
The February
February.
and the May,
and they
so we
made
should
a-
be adopting the May.
Yeah, I think we may have done it backwards.
Oh, it says
the-
May on here.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying.
do we are we sure we have the right one and not the February version?
That's what I'm saying. I think we
Yeah.
did. I think we took the
I checked.
February version and
Okay.
put May on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
So I think we need
So
to-
is the clean version not correct?
I don't think so.
Okay.
This may be the February and not the May version.
Okay.
It was updated twice perhaps, and we need to make sure we have the May version adopted and not the February.
Okay. Ms. Tanner, do you think you could do that while we're in our closed session? Okay. All right.
And then just for,
Go to the May updates at the
Right.
VSBA website.
Yeah.
Get it off that, to be sure, compare it to this.
and going back to the, was it DJ, what was the one that we added the Z on and we were talking about the petty cash?
DLZ or DMZ.
I think it was
DJ,
DJ,
BZ, and that's February.
Right. Can you bring that one up again? I just want to make sure I'm
You said DJ what?
DJ, BZ.
BZ.
Go outside there. It's just like 4 down.
So, okay, slow down, slow down for a minute.
Oh,
So,
it says red line.
okay. you can go.
Okay.
So the Z says that this is a policy that only Norfolk has, is that correct?
Right, Norfolk specific.
Or some portion of it is different from the VSBA.
Even if it's one word.
So is our, I don't know if this is the one, but I think somewhere along the way we were talking about the, such funds shall not exceed $500. Is that what we're keeping that makes ours the Z?
It's,
Yes.
You want to go back and look at the current, and then look at her change?
Because there was,
This is the current.
Yes,
exceed-
not
the
to exceed
bottom.
500,
Mhm.
yeah.
we're keeping 500 where I think maybe the recommendation was 2,500. Is that what we're saying makes ours
I
unique?
think that was in
It's a bond of 4,000.
I'm just trying to figure out
but
what's.
no
what-
additional
Wait.
bond shall be required.
You took away the bond information.
yeah.
I mean, the bond information was taken away and she added a Z.
Mr. Jordan, can you state your question again, please?
I'm not sure how to state it. I'm trying to, so there's when I looked at the VSBA version in the first paragraph, they have such funds shall not exceed $2,000 each.
Right.
So then we say such funds shall not exceed $500 each. We are intentionally keeping the $500 and not the $2,000.
It says 500 on the first one.
That's
here.
what I'm asking,
I know,
right?
but
And
the-
it says it in our
That's,
ours as well.
Because she wants to keep it, she's
that's what I'm trying to
recommending-
clarify.
yes,
We're keeping
right,
it low.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
But
then
the change
we
is in
are,
the last.
and then we are removing the bond requirement, and that was, and the rationale behind that was what?
We have insurance that covers that.
Yeah.
We haven't, okay.
There's insurance that covers that. We don't bond. I would call Ms. Ingram advising that we don't do the bonding any
Okay.
longer. It's insurance covers that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, okay.
Are there any
Um,
more questions related to the policies?
No, okay. So, excellent, thank you all very much. So November 18th is your next policy
Is there a policy committee
meeting, right?
to discuss those policies that,
The parking
that
lot
are,
items?
that we're still working on, and then December 4th, policies that we are ready to bring forward for their board discussion will happen at that work session.
So it would be helpful then, since it sounds like we're gonna be able to have some discussion about those parking lot policies, to let us know for agenda planning, you know, like an hour time or 45-minute time, so that we can make sure that we plan accordingly. Okay? Okay, all right. Excellent, thank you very much. All right, great, okay. I would like to get a motion to go into closed session.
Madam Chair, I move that we enter closed session.
Is there a second? I don't want to go in a closed session.
Second. That's weird. Okay.
Motion to go home? Okay, there's a motion, there's a second.
The resolution.
Can you read the resolution, Ms. Tanner?
Yes, ma'am. Move that members of the school board go into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for a discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools pursuant to subsection 1 of the above cited code section. The subject of this portion of the session concerns the personnel agenda of this date. B, discussion or consideration of disciplinary and other matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools that would involve the disclosure of information contained in a scholastic record pursuant to subsection 2 of the above cited code section. The subjects of this portion of the session is the Student Support Services agenda of this date and the consideration of the funding and awarding of scholarship to specific students. And C, consultation with legal counsel pertaining to specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal aid by counsel pursuant to subsection 8 of the above cited code section. The subjects of this section of the motion are consultation with legal counsel concerning legal matters related to the personnel and student support matters identified above.
Great, is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing that there's none, Ms. Tanner, please call the roll.
Basine?
Aye.
Campson? Clanton?
Aye.
Smith?
They went to the.
They went to the bathroom.
Excuse themselves for a minute.
Okay,
Okay,
Martin,
Aye.
Jordan,
Aye.
Gabriel.
Aye. Okay. Motion carries.
This correction.
Move on to the question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.